One crumpled napkin. That was all it took to change the course of history for two very different people. Most people walk through life with their heads down, minding their own business, terrified of the consequences of speaking up. But Sarah Bennett wasn't most people. Standing in a greasy diner booth, she made a split-second decision to warn a stranger that his best friend was holding a knife to his back. She expected to be fired. She expected to be ignored. She never expected a phantom Rolls-Royce to pull up to her crumbling apartment complex the very next morning. This is the true story of how one act of integrity exposed a billion-dollar empire's darkest secret. Rain lashed against the cracked plate glass windows of the Midnight Griddle, a 24-hour diner sitting on the edge of Chicago's financial district. It was the kind of place where high-powered brokers came to sober up after a night of excess, and where people like Sarah Bennett came to scrape together a living. Sarah wiped down the counter with a rag that had seen better days. Her wrist ached. The clock on the wall read 2:14 a.m., and the neon sign outside buzzed with an irritating, rhythmic hum. Inside her pocket, her phone felt heavy, not because of its weight, but because of the eviction notice she knew was sitting in her email inbox. $400. She was short $400 for rent, and her landlord, Mr. Henderson, had made it clear that next week was a deadline that had already passed. Coffee. Black. Keep it coming. A voice boomed from the corner booth. Sarah sighed, smoothed her apron, and grabbed the pot. The corner booth was usually reserved for the regulars, but tonight it was occupied by two men who looked like they had taken a wrong turn on their way to the Ritz-Carlton. The man who had shouted, Arthur Sterling, wore a suit that likely cost more than Sarah's entire year of earnings. He was loud, boisterous, and had the flushed complexion of a man celebrating a massive victory. Opposite him sat a younger, leaner man with eyes like shards of flint. He sipped his water meticulously. This was Derek Cole. Sarah approached the table, pouring the steaming coffee into Arthur's mug. "To the merger," Arthur cheered, raising his mug as if it were champagne. "Derek, my boy, you've outdone yourself. The board is going to lose their minds when they see the acquisition numbers." Derek didn't smile. He just adjusted his silk tie. "Keep your voice down, Arthur. We haven't signed the papers with the offshore entity yet. You know how the SEC gets about early celebrations." Sarah paused. She had learned to be invisible in this job. Waitresses were furniture. They were ghosts. People said things in front of her that they wouldn't dare whisper in a confessional. She turned to wipe the adjacent table, moving slowly, her ears pricked. "The SEC isn't looking at us," Arthur scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "Besides, that's why I have you. You're the numbers guy. I'm just the face. The visionary." Derek leaned in. His voice dropped to a low, serpentine hiss. "Exactly, Arthur. You're the face. Which is why, when the transfer hits the Cayman account tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., the signature on the authorization needs to be yours." Of course, Arthur laughed, oblivious. "I trust you with my life, Derek. You've been with me since the prep school days." "Since the days you copied my calculus homework," Derek muttered, though Arthur didn't hear the malice in it. Sarah moved closer to the ketchup bottles, feigning a need to reorganize them. The tone in Derek's voice sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the diner's drafty air conditioning. "I've set up the shell company as Sterling Vanguard," Derek continued, his eyes scanning the diner to ensure no one was listening. He didn't count the waitress. "Once you sign the digital key at 8:30 a.m., the assets transfer. All 300 million. It secures the deal." 300 million, Arthur whistled. "Risky. But we have to risk it to get the biscuit, right?" "Right," Derek said. He pulled a phone from his pocket and typed a quick message. Sarah caught the reflection of the screen in the darkened window next to them. It was a text message to a contact named simply the cleaner. The text read, "He signs at 8:30. Flight booked for 10 hours. He takes the fall for the embezzlement by noon." Sarah froze. The rag in her hand stopped moving. It wasn't a merger. It was a setup. Derek Cole wasn't securing Arthur Sterling's fortune. He was stealing it and leaving Arthur holding the bag for a massive financial crime. Arthur, the loud, trusting man who tipped well and laughed too much, was about to be destroyed by his oldest friend. Panic fluttered in Sarah's chest. "Do not get involved," she told herself. "You have rent to pay. You have a sick aunt in Wisconsin. You cannot lose this job." But then she looked at Arthur's face. He was smiling, looking at a picture of his daughter on his phone, showing it to Derek. "She's graduating next week, Derek. I'm going to surprise her with a trip to Italy." Derek barely looked at the photo. "That's nice, Arthur. Make sure you sign those papers first." Sarah walked back to the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The chef, a gruesome man named Big Sal, yelled at her for an order of toast, but she barely heard him. She stared at the order pad in her pocket. If she said nothing, Arthur Sterling goes to prison, and Derek Cole vanishes with $300 million. If she said something, she could be wrong. She could be fired. Or worse, men who stole that kind of money didn't like witnesses. She looked at the ticket for table 4. Check requested. Sarah took a deep breath. She ripped a blank page from her order pad. Her hand shook as she uncapped her cheap blue ballpoint pen. She didn't have time to explain everything. She had to be quick. She had to be discreet. She wrote 4 sentences. "Do not sign the transfer at 8:30. He is not your friend. Check the text message he sent to the cleaner. He is framing you." She folded the paper until it was no larger than a stamp. Walking back to the table felt like walking to the gallows. Sarah forced a smile, the muscles in her cheeks twitching with the effort. "Here's the check, gentlemen," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. She placed the black leather folder on the table. Arthur reached for it immediately, his platinum credit card already in hand. "I've got this, Derek. Least I can do for the mastermind." "You're too generous, Arthur," Derek said, his eyes glued to his phone again. This was the moment. As Arthur opened the folder to sign the receipt, Sarah cleared the empty water glass from in front of him. As she lifted the glass, she used her other hand to slide the folded note directly under Arthur's hand, pressing it against the warmth of his palm. Arthur flinched slightly, looking up at her. Sarah widened her eyes, staring intensely into his. She gave a microscopic shake of her head and darted her eyes toward Derek, then back to the note under his hand. "Have a wonderful night, sir," she said, her voice dropping an octave, laden with meaning. "Drive safe. The roads are treacherous." Arthur Sterling was a man who had made his fortune on intuition. He wasn't as oblivious as he seemed. He just chose to see the best in people. But he recognized the look of fear in the waitress's eyes. He felt the paper against his skin. He didn't pull his hand away. He didn't expose the note. Instead, he closed his fist around it, turning the motion into a cough. "Thanks, darling," Arthur said. He kept his fist closed. Derek looked up, suspicious. "Everything all right?" "Just a tickle in my throat," Arthur said, coughing again. "Let's get out of here. I need to rest up for the big signing." Sarah retreated to the counter, her back turned to them, scrubbing a coffee stain that was already gone. She watched them leave through the reflection in the pie case. She saw Arthur pause under the street lamp outside, while Derek walked toward the valet stand. Arthur opened his hand. He read the note. Sarah saw his shoulders stiffen. He looked toward Derek's retreating back, then back at the diner window. For a second, his eyes met Sarah's through the glass and the rain. He gave a sharp, somber nod, shoved the note into his pocket, and got into his waiting limousine. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of anxiety. Sarah jumped every time the door chime rang, expecting Derek Cole to burst in with a silencer or the police to arrive. By the time 6 a.m. rolled around and her shift ended, she was exhausted to her bones. She walked home in the drizzle. Her apartment was a studio in a crumbling brick building in the South Side, miles away from the glitz of the financial district. She climbed the 4 flights of stairs, the smell of stale smoke and boiled cabbage clinging to the hallway. She collapsed onto her mattress, still in her uniform. I shouldn't have done it, she thought. I'm crazy. I'm a waitress, not a spy. Sleep took her, but it was fitful and filled with nightmares of shredded documents and prison bars. Bang! 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 Sarah jolted awake. The sunlight was streaming through her thin curtains. She checked her phone. 11 a.m. Bang! 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 Someone was hammering on her door. Sarah! Sarah Bennett! It was Mr. Henderson, the landlord. Sarah groaned, burying her face in her hands. She didn't have the rent. She hadn't even made enough in tips last night to cover half of it. I'm coming, she yelled, her voice raspy. She dragged herself out of bed, smoothing her hair. She opened the door, prepared to beg for 3 more days. Mr. Henderson was standing there, but he didn't look angry. He looked bewildered. He was sweating, wringing his hands together. Sarah, he stuttered. There's someone here for you. I told you I get paid on Friday, Sarah started, defensive. No, it's not that, Henderson said, stepping aside. Behind him, standing in the narrow, dirty hallway, was a man in a pristine black chauffeur's uniform. He held a cap in his white-gloved hands. He looked entirely out of place, like a diamond in a dumpster. Ms. Sarah Bennett, the chauffeur asked. His voice was deep and professional. Yes, Sarah whispered, gripping the doorframe. Mr. Sterling requests your presence immediately. Sarah's blood ran cold. Derek found out, or Arthur didn't believe me and thinks I'm crazy. I can't, Sarah stammered. I have another shift at 5. Mr. Sterling insisted, the chauffeur said. He also instructed me to give you this. The chauffeur reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. He extended it to her. Sarah took it. It wasn't sealed. She opened the flap and pulled out the contents. It was a cashier's check. She looked at the numbers. She blinked, thinking her eyes were playing tricks on her. She counted the zeros. $10,000. This, Sarah gasped. What is this? Compensation for your time today, the chauffeur said impassively. And there is a car waiting downstairs. Sarah looked past the chauffeur to the window at the end of the hall. Parked directly in front of the fire hydrant, blocking the entire street, was a silver Rolls-Royce Phantom. A crowd of neighbors had gathered around it, taking photos. Mr. Henderson's jaw was practically on the floor. Sarah, who do you know? Sarah ignored him. She looked at the check again. $10,000. That was her rent for a year. That was her debt cleared. And this was just for her time. I need to get changed, Sarah said, her voice trembling. Take your time, Miss Bennett. The chauffeur nodded. We will wait. 20 minutes later, Sarah stepped out of her building. She wore her best outfit, a simple navy blue dress she used for church and job interviews. The chauffeur opened the rear suicide door of the Rolls-Royce. The interior smelled of rich mahogany and fresh leather. As the car glided away, leaving her stunned neighbors in a cloud of exhaust, Sarah sat back. She wasn't safe yet. Money like this didn't come without strings. The partition between her and the driver rolled down. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked. "The Sterling Tower," the driver replied. "Penthouse suite. The meeting has already begun, and Mr. Sterling said they cannot proceed without the witness." Witness. The word hung in the air. Sarah realized then that the $10,000 wasn't a gift. It was a retainer. She was walking straight into the lion's den, and she had no idea if Arthur Sterling had won the battle or if she was being delivered to Derek Cole as a peace offering. The elevator ride to the 50th floor of the Sterling Tower took 45 seconds, but to Sarah it felt like a lifetime. The pressure in her ears popped as the numbers on the digital display climbed higher, leaving the grit of the street far below. She smoothed the skirt of her navy dress for the 100th time. The fabric felt cheap against the plush leather of the car that had brought her here. And now, standing in this mirror-lined box, she felt like an imposter about to be exposed. The door slid open with a soft chime. Sarah stepped out into a lobby that screamed power. The floors were white marble, the walls were glass, and the view of Chicago was breathtaking. But the silence was heavy. A stern-faced woman with glasses perched on her nose, Arthur's secretary, presumably, nodded at Sarah and pointed toward a set of double oak doors at the end of the hall. "They are waiting," the woman said. Sarah walked forward. Her heels clicked loudly on the marble. She reached the doors, took a breath, and pushed them open. The boardroom was massive. A long mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by a dozen men and women in dark suits. The air was thick with tension. At the head of the table sat Arthur Sterling, looking more serious than she had ever seen him. To his right sat Derek Cole. When Sarah entered, every head turned. "Who is this?" Derek snapped, standing up. "Arthur, we are in the middle of a sensitive acquisition. You can't just parade your company in here." Arthur didn't look at Derek. He looked at Sarah. He gestured to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table. "Please, Miss Bennett, have a seat." Sarah's legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to walk to the chair. She sat down, folding her hands on the table to hide their trembling. "This is Sarah Bennett," Arthur announced, his voice calm but carrying a dangerous edge. "She is my independent auditor for this transaction." Derek let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Auditor? She looks like she shops at a thrift store. Arthur, stop stalling. The wire window closes in 15 minutes. Sign the authorization." Arthur picked up a heavy fountain pen. He twirled it between his fingers. "I did some checking, Derek, after our dinner last night. I was curious about the text message you received at 2:14 a.m. Derek's face went pale, but he recovered quickly. "I told you, that was my broker." "Ms. Bennett," Arthur said, turning to Sarah. "Would you mind repeating what you heard Mr. Cole say regarding the SEC and the Shell Company?" Sarah felt Derek's glare. It was venomous. If looks could kill, she would have dropped dead right there on the expensive carpet. But then she remembered the eviction notice. She remembered the arrogance in Derek's voice when he planned to destroy his best friend. Sarah cleared her throat. "Mr. Cole said, 'The SEC isn't looking at us. I've set up the Shell Company as Sterling Vanguard. Once you sign the digital key, the assets transfer. All 300 million. The room went silent. The other board members exchanged nervous glances. "She's lying!" Derek shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "She's a waitress. I remember her now. She served us coffee. You hired a waitress to come in here and slander me." "I didn't hire her," Arthur corrected. "She saved me." Arthur pressed a button on the console in front of him. A large screen on the wall flickered to life. It displayed a blown-up screenshot of a text log. "Recipient, the cleaner message. He signs at 8:30. Flight booked for 10 was." He takes the fall for the embezzlement by noon. A collective gasp went through the room. Derek froze. He looked at the screen, then at Arthur. The mask of friendship slipped completely, revealing the predator underneath. "Where did you get that?" Derek hissed. "You really shouldn't use the company phone for treason, Derek," Arthur said coldly. "Our IT department mirrors all executive devices. I usually don't check yours. I trusted you, but Miss Bennet gave me a reason to look." Arthur stood up. He looked taller, broader, like a titan of industry rather than the jovial man in the diner. "Security!" Arthur barked. The side doors burst open. 4 uniformed security officers marched in, led by a man who looked like an ex-linebacker. They surrounded Derek. "This is a mistake," Derek snarled, adjusting his cuffs as the officers grabbed his arms. "You think you can pin this on me? I know where the bodies are buried, Arthur. I built this empire just as much as you did." "You built nothing," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a whisper that echoed in the silent room. "You just moved the money around while I did the work. Get him out of my sight. The police are waiting in the lobby." Derek struggled, kicking a chair over as they dragged him toward the door. Just before he was hauled out, he locked eyes with Sarah. "You!" Derek spat, his eyes bulging with rage. "You little rat! You have no idea what you've done. You think you're a hero? You're just collateral damage now." The doors slammed shut, cutting off his shouts. The silence returned to the boardroom, but now the tension was broken, replaced by shock. The board members looked at Arthur, terrified that his wrath might turn on them next. Arthur sighed, looking suddenly 20 years older. He looked down the long table at Sarah. "Meeting adjourned," Arthur said wearily. "Everyone out, except Miss Bennet." The suits scrambled for the exits, clutching their briefcases, eager to escape the fallout. Within moments, Sarah and Arthur were alone in the vast, glass-walled room. Arthur walked over to the window, staring out at the city skyline. "He was the best man at my wedding," he said softly. "God rest my wife's soul. He held my daughter when she was born." Sarah didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling." Arthur turned around. A sad smile played on his lips. "Don't be. You saved my life, Sarah. Not just my money. If he had framed me, I would have died in prison." He walked over to where she sat and pulled out the chair next to her, sitting down heavily. "That check I gave you," Arthur said. "The 10,000, have you cashed it?" "Not yet," Sarah said. "I didn't have time." "Good," Arthur said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He ripped the $10,000 check out of her hand and tore it into confetti. Sarah's heart stopped. "Mr. Sterling." "That's insult money," Arthur said. "Waitress money." He began writing a new check. "You possess a quality that cannot be taught, Sarah. Integrity. Everyone in this room," he gestured to the empty chairs, "has an MBA from Harvard or Yale, and not one of them would have done what you did. They would have looked the other way. Or worse, they would have asked Derek for a cut." He slid the new check across the table. Sarah looked at it. It wasn't a check. It was an employment contract. Sarah stared at the document. The header read, "Sterling Enterprises. Executive Liaison." The salary figure listed at the bottom made her dizzy. It was more money than she would make in 10 years at the diner. "I don't understand," Sarah said, looking up at him. "I don't know anything about business. I barely finished community college. I serve pancakes." "You listen," Arthur corrected. "And you observe. You saw something in Derek that I was too blind to see. I need that eyes. I need someone who isn't part of this Shark Tank." He leaned back. "The job is yours. You'll be my personal assistant, my gatekeeper. You travel where I travel. You vet the people I meet. Essentially, you are my professional paranoiac. Mr. Sterling, Sarah hesitated. It was too fast. It was a fairy tale, and fairy tales usually had witches and dragons. Derek's threat echoed in her mind. You're just collateral damage now. I have a sick aunt, Sarah said quietly, in Wisconsin. She relies on me sending money every month. I can't just uproot my life. We will move her to the best private care facility in Chicago, Arthur said, without missing a beat. Full expense coverage. She'll have round-the-clock doctors. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. That was the one burden that had been crushing her for years, the fear that her aunt would die because Sarah couldn't afford her medication. Why? Sarah asked. Why are you doing this? Because I'm lonely, Arthur admitted, his voice raw. And because I'm surrounded by vultures. I need a human being. Sarah picked up the pen. Her hand shook, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from hope. She signed her name on the dotted line. Welcome to the team, Sarah, Arthur said, his smile finally reaching his eyes. Now, let's get you something to eat that isn't from a diner menu. We have a lot of work to do. Derek left a mess, and the vultures are going to be circling once the news of his arrest breaks. Just then, Arthur's phone rang. It was a harsh, jarring sound in the quiet room. Arthur frowned. It's Garrison, my head of security. He answered it on speaker. Garrison, did the police take custody of Derek? There was a pause on the line. Static crackled. Mr. Sterling, Garrison's voice was grim. We have a problem. The police transport van never made it to the precinct. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. What do you mean? Arthur demanded, standing up. The van was intercepted 3 blocks from the tower, Garrison reported. 2 SUVs, heavily armed. They took the officers' weapons and neutralized the vehicle. Derek Cole is gone. Arthur slammed his fist onto the table. Intercepted. He has an extraction team. It gets worse, sir, Garrison continued. We just got a ping from the Chicago PD scanner. There's been a fire reported in the South Side, an apartment complex on 4th Street. Sarah gasped. She grabbed the edge of the table. That's my street. The fire department says it looks like arson, Garrison said. It started in Unit 4B. That's my apartment, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. Arthur looked at her, horror dawning on his face. He grabbed the phone. Is anyone hurt? The building was evacuated. No casualties reported yet, Garrison said. But the unit is gutted. Whoever did this wanted to send a message. Arthur ended the call. The silence in the boardroom was no longer peaceful. It was terrifying. Sarah stood up, her hands trembling uncontrollably. He burned my home. He knows where I live. He's coming for me. No, Arthur said firmly. He walked around the table and placed his hands on her shoulders. He is trying to scare you. He is trying to flush you out, but he made a mistake. What mistake? Sarah cried. He's free, and he has a hit squad. His mistake was thinking you are still just a waitress, Arthur said, his eyes hardening into steel. You are under my protection now. You are part of the Sterling family, and no one touches my family. He pressed the intercom button on the table. Garrison, bring the car around, the armored one, and call the pilot. Prep the jet. Where are we going? Sarah asked, panic rising in her chest. We're going to a safe house, Arthur said. But first, we are going to pick up your aunt. Derek Cole wants a war. I'll give him a war. But we fight on my terms. Sarah looked out the window. Smoke was rising in the distance from the south side, a dark smudge against the grey sky. Her old life was literally going up in flames. There was no going back to the diner. There was no going back to her apartment. She had stepped into a world of billionaires and betrayals, and the only way out was to survive. "Let's go," Sarah said, wiping the tears from her face. As they walked toward the elevator, Sarah didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like a soldier marching into battle, but she had no idea that Derek Cole wasn't working alone. The cleaner from the text message wasn't just a hitman. He was something far worse, and he was already watching them from the building across the street. Rain slicked the tarmac of the private airfield just outside O'Hare. The armored SUV screeched to a halt next to a sleek Gulfstream G650, its engines already whining with a high-pitched keen. Arthur Sterling kicked the door open before the vehicle had fully stopped. "Go! Move!" he shouted over the roar of the turbines. Sarah scrambled out, clutching her Aunt Linda's hand. Linda, frail and wrapped in a thick wool blanket, looked around with wide, confused eyes. The medication Arthur's private doctor had administered for the transport was keeping her calm, but the confusion was evident. "Sarah, why are we at the airport? Did I miss my bingo night?" Linda murmured, stumbling on the wet pavement. "Just a vacation, Auntie." "A surprise vacation," Sarah lied, guiding her towards the plane's stairs. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every shadow in the hangar looked like a gunman. Every mechanic with a wrench looked like Derek Cole's assassin. Garrison, the head of security, stood at the base of the stairs, an assault rifle held low across his chest. He scanned the perimeter, his earpiece buzzing with chatter. "We have a bogey at the gate," Garrison shouted to Arthur. "Black sedan, no plates. They just blew past the checkpoint." "Get them on board," Arthur roared. He grabbed Linda's other arm, helping Sarah hoist the elderly woman up the stairs. Sarah glanced back. Through the open hangar doors, she saw headlights cutting through the gloom. A car was speeding across the tarmac, swerving around a fuel truck. A muzzle flash sparked from the passenger window. Crack! A bullet ricocheted off the SUV they had just exited. "Go! Go!" Garrison returned fire, backing up the stairs. Sarah practically threw her aunt into the plush cabin of the jet. The stewardess, a terrified woman named Chloe, immediately strapped Linda into a leather recliner. Arthur slammed the cabin door shut and locked it. "Pilot, take off, now!" he screamed into the intercom. The jet didn't wait for clearance. It lurched forward, the G-force pinning Sarah to her seat. As the plane banked sharply to the left, climbing steeply into the grey clouds, Sarah looked out the porthole. Below them, 3 men were standing on the tarmac, watching the plane disappear. One of them held a phone to his ear. Sarah shivered. They had escaped by seconds. Once they reached cruising altitude, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted from panic to a heavy, suffocating dread. Arthur poured himself a scotch, his hands shaking slightly. He wasn't the titan of industry right now. He was a man on the run. "I'm sorry," Arthur said, staring into his glass. "I dragged you into this." Sarah checked on Aunt Linda, who was now fast asleep, lulled by the hum of the engines. She walked over to Arthur and sat opposite him. "You didn't drag me," Sarah said. "I wrote the note. I made the choice." She paused. "Who are they, Arthur?" "Derek is a businessman, not a warlord." "How does he have a paramilitary team?" Arthur sighed, rubbing his temples. "Derek was the CFO, but he also managed our off-book investments. Sterling Enterprises deals in rare earth minerals in volatile regions. We need security. Derek was in charge of contracting those private military firms. It seems he made friends with the wrong kind of mercenaries." "The text message," Sarah recalled. "He mentioned the cleaner." "A myth?" Arthur said. "Or so I thought. In the corporate underworld, there's a rumor of a man who fixes impossible problems. No name, no face, just results. If Derek hired him, nowhere is safe." Sarah looked around the cabin. It was a palace in the sky, cream leather, gold fixtures, satellite Wi-Fi, but it felt like a coffin. "Where are we going?" "St. Jude's Cay," Arthur replied. "I own the island. It's in the Caribbean, completely off the grid. Independent power, water filtration, and a security system that rivals the Pentagon. We'll be safe there while my lawyers and the FBI hunt Derek down." Sarah nodded, but a nagging feeling in her gut wouldn't go away. She had spent years reading people for tips. She knew when someone was lying, when a couple was fighting, or when a customer was about to dine and dash. She looked at Garrison, who was sitting in the jump seat near the cockpit, cleaning his weapon. He looked professional, stoic. Then she looked at Chloe, the flight attendant. Chloe was in the galley, preparing food. Her hands were trembling so bad she dropped a silver fork. It clattered loudly. Sarah stood up. "I'll help her." "You're a guest, Sarah," Arthur protested weakly. "I need something to do," she insisted. Sarah walked into the small galley. Chloe jumped when she entered. "Here, let me help you with the tray," Sarah said, reaching for the coffee pot. "No, I mean, it's fine, Miss Bennett." "I have it," Chloe stammered. She was pale, sweating. Sarah narrowed her eyes. She noticed Chloe kept glancing at her wristwatch, a heavy, masculine smartwatch that looked too big for her wrist. "Nice watch," Sarah said casually. "New," Chloe flinched, pulling her sleeve down. My boyfriend gave it to me." Sarah grabbed a napkin, pretending to wipe a spill. As she leaned in, she saw the screen of the watch light up. It wasn't a text message. It was a countdown timer. "Row 45, 45 minutes. Where are we landing, Chloe?" Sarah asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "St. Jude's," Chloe squeaked. "How long is the flight?" 3 hours. Sarah did the math. The timer wasn't for landing. The timer was for something else. Sarah's eyes darted to the coffee pot. Chloe had just brewed it, but she hadn't poured any for herself. "Arthur takes it black, right?" Sarah asked. "Yes," Chloe said, reaching for the pot. "Wait." Sarah grabbed Chloe's wrist. "Why are you shaking?" "I'm scared," Chloe cried, tears spilling over. "They shot at us." "No," Sarah said, her grip tightening. "You were scared before the shooting started. I saw you at the hangar. You were checking that watch." Sarah looked at the coffee pot, then at the trash bin in the galley. Resting right on top was a small, empty vial of clear liquid. Adrenaline flooded Sarah's system. She shoved Chloe back against the bulkhead. "Don't move." Sarah grabbed the coffee pot and marched out into the cabin. Arthur was reaching out, expecting a cup. "Don't drink it," Sarah yelled, slapping the mug out of his hand. "Sarah!" Arthur gasped. "What is wrong with you?" "The flight attendant," Sarah hissed, pointing at the galley. "She drugged the coffee, and she has a timer on her watch." Garrison unbuckled immediately, drawing his sidearm. He moved toward the galley. Chloe screamed and tried to lock herself in the bathroom, but Garrison kicked the door before it latched. He dragged her out, throwing her onto the floor. "Check the watch!" Sarah shouted. Garrison looked at the smartwatch. 0:42:10. "What happens in 42 minutes?" Garrison barked, pressing the muzzle of his gun to the floor next to her head. "I don't know," Chloe sobbed. "They said they would kill my sister. They have her. They told me to put the sedative in the coffee and unlock the cockpit door at 0 hour. Arthur stood up, his face ashen. "Unlock the cockpit? Why?" "The pilot," Sarah realized. "The pilot isn't part of it. If we're all asleep, then the plane crashes," Garrison finished grimly. "Or it gets hijacked remotely." Arthur looked at Sarah with a mixture of horror and awe. "You noticed the watch?" "I noticed she was terrified of the wrong thing," Sarah said, her voice shaking now that the moment of action had passed. "A waitress knows the difference between fear of a gun and guilt." Garrison handcuffed Chloe and strapped her into a seat away from everyone else. We can't trust the food, the water, or the staff. Arthur, you fly this thing? I have a license, Arthur said, but not for a G650. You better learn fast, Garrison said, because once that timer hits 0 and the door doesn't open, whoever is controlling this operation is going to execute Plan B. The rest of the flight was a white-knuckle nightmare. They didn't crash, but the paranoia was thick enough to choke on. When the landing gear finally touched down on the private strip of St. Jude's Quay, Sarah felt like she had aged 10 years. The island was beautiful, a jewel of emerald jungle surrounded by turquoise water. But to Sarah, it looked like a prison. A team of security guards, men Arthur swore were loyal, men he had personally vetted for years, met the plane. They took Chloe into custody. Garrison took charge immediately, sweeping the perimeter. They were driven in electric carts up a winding path to the main villa. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture, glass walls, cantilevered decks, and an infinity pool that seemed to drop into the ocean. "Welcome home," Arthur said, though his voice lacked enthusiasm. They settled Aunt Linda into a guest suite that overlooked the garden. She was delighted by the tropical hotel and immediately asked for room service. Sarah didn't have the heart to tell her the kitchen staff was currently being interrogated by Garrison. Night fell quickly in the tropics. The villa turned into a glowing lantern against the pitch-black jungle. Sarah sat in the main living room, surrounded by monitors. Arthur had turned the space into a command center. He was furiously typing on a laptop, trying to trace the money Derek had stolen. "It's not just the money," Arthur muttered. "Derek stole the source codes for our next-generation defense software. That's what he's selling. The $3 million was just a down payment. The real buyers are foreign intelligence agencies." Sarah walked over to the window. The glass was bulletproof, Arthur had said. But she felt exposed. "Did you find out who texted Chloe?" Sarah asked. "Burner phone," Arthur said. "Untraceable. But Garrison found a tracker in her luggage. They knew exactly where we were every second." Suddenly, the lights in the villa flickered. Arthur stopped typing. "That's not right. We have 3 backup generators." The lights buzzed and died. The villa was plunged into total darkness. The hum of the air conditioning silenced. The only light came from the moon reflecting off the ocean. "Garrison!" Arthur shouted into the dark. No answer. "Stay here," Arthur whispered to Sarah. He opened a hidden panel in the wall and pulled out a handgun. "Lock the door behind me." "No," Sarah said, grabbing his arm. "We stick together. You said I'm your eyes. You can't see in the dark." Arthur hesitated, then nodded. "Stay close." They moved into the hallway. The silence was absolute. Where were the guards? Where was Garrison? Sarah's foot nudged something soft. She stifled a scream. It was a guard. He wasn't dead, but he was unconscious, a dart protruding from his neck. "Tranquilizers," Arthur whispered. "Silent breach." They crept toward the control room. The door was ajar. Inside, the bank of security monitors was dark, except for one. On that single screen, green text was scrolling. "Hello, Arthur. The island is secure, but you are not. Send out the girl." Sarah stared at the screen. "Send out the girl. They want me." "You're the loose end," Arthur said grimly. "You're the only one who can testify that Derek signed the order knowingly. Without you, he can claim entrapment or coercion. With you dead, he walks free." A voice boomed over the villa's intercom system, a distorted, metallic voice. "Mr. Sterling, we have control of the ventilation system. In 3 minutes, we will release a neurotoxin into the house. It is painless. Everyone sleeps. Everyone dies. Aunt Linda included." Sarah grabbed Arthur's arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. "My aunt." "However," the voice continued, If Miss Bennet walks out the front door in the next 2 minutes, we will vent the gas and leave the rest of you alive. The choice is yours. Tick-tock. Arthur looked at Sarah. In the moonlight, his face was resolute. We are not doing that. He'll kill my aunt, Sarah whispered. Arthur, I have to go. No, Arthur hissed. That's what they want. They kill you, then they kill us anyway to leave no witnesses. Think, Sarah. You noticed the watch. You noticed the text. Notice something now. Look at the screen. Sarah forced herself to focus on the monitor with the scrolling green text. She looked past the threat. She looked at the reflection in the screen. She looked at the interface. Wait, Sarah whispered. That interface, it's not external hack. Look at the command prompt line at the bottom. User, admin 04. Arthur squinted. Admin 04, that's... He stopped. His face went white. That's Garrison's login, Arthur said. Garrison didn't answer you when the lights went out, Sarah said, her mind racing. He was the one who found the tracker in Chloe's bag. He was the one who checked the perimeter. He's the only one with the codes to override the generators. Garrison has been with me for 15 years, Arthur said, in denial. He took a bullet for me in Bogota. And everyone has a price, Sarah said. Or a leverage point, just like Chloe had her sister. The intercom crackled again. 1 minute, Sarah. Don't be selfish. He's inside, Sarah realized. He's not outside with a megaphone. He's using the house system. If he's admin 04, he has to be at a hard-wired terminal to bypass the remote lockout. The server room, Arthur said. It's in the basement. It's a bunker. Can we get there? It's the only place with manual overrides for the ventilation, Arthur said. But he'll be waiting. He's expecting me to walk out the front door, Sarah said. She looked at the unconscious guard on the floor. She saw his radio. She bent down and unclipped it. She pressed the button. I'm coming out, she yelled into the radio, hoping Garrison was listening on the frequency. Don't hurt them. I'm coming to the front door. She threw the radio down the hallway toward the front entrance. Now run, Sarah whispered. Arthur and Sarah sprinted in the opposite direction toward the service stairs leading down to the darkness of the basement. They were running blindly into the belly of the beast, hoping that Sarah's bluff would buy them the 30 seconds they needed to save their lives. As they reached the heavy steel door of the server room, Arthur tried the handle. Locked. He raised his gun to shoot the lock, but the door suddenly hissed and swung open. Standing there, bathed in the blue light of the server towers, was Garrison. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a detonator. And tied to the main server rack, looking terrified and bruised, was the real Garrison. The man standing with the detonator smiled. It was the driver who had brought them from the airport. The quiet man who had loaded the luggage. You really should vet your temp staff better, Arthur, the man said. Garrison put up a good fight, but he's getting old. The imposter raised the detonator. End of the line, Waitress. The hum of the servers was deafening, a stark contrast to the silence of the standoff. The man standing before them, the fake driver, the assassin, the cleaner, held the detonator with the casual grip of someone changing a television channel. You're good, Sarah, the cleaner said, his voice smooth and cold. You spotted the coffee. You spotted the Garrison fake-out, but you can't spot a bullet. Arthur stepped in front of Sarah, shielding her with his body. This ends now. How much is Derek paying you? I'll double it. I'll triple it. The cleaner laughed, a dry, humorless sound. It's not about the money anymore, Arthur. It's about reputation. If I let a waitress and a soft CEO beat me, I'm out of business. Besides, the gas canisters are already primed in the vents. One click, and the whole island goes to sleep forever. He raised his thumb over the button. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked around the room, desperate. She saw the real Garrison, bound and gagged, eyes wide with panic, struggling against the zip ties securing him to the server rack. She saw the rows of blinking blue lights, and then she saw the red box on the wall, directly behind the cleaner. Halon fire suppression system. Manual override. The server room was designed to protect data at all costs. If a fire was detected, the room would seal, and halon gas would dump instantly to suck the oxygen out of the air and extinguish the flames. It wouldn't kill them immediately, but it would be violent, loud and disorienting. But the cleaner was standing between her and the lever. "You know," Sarah said, her voice trembling but loud, "you made one mistake." The cleaner paused, his thumb hovering millimeters from the trigger. His ego was his weakness. He wanted to know how he had been perceived. "And what is that?" "You forgot to take the customer's order," Sarah said. She grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall next to her and didn't aim it at him. She aimed it at the server rack next to him. She squeezed the trigger. A massive cloud of white chemical powder exploded into the room, blinding the cleaner and filling the air with choking dust. "Garrison!" Sarah screamed. In the confusion, the cleaner fired blindly. Bang! Bang! A spark showered down from a shattered server tower. The gunshot triggered the room's automatic sensors. Whoosh! The halon system engaged. A blast of high-pressure gas slammed into the room from the ceiling nozzles, sounding like a jet engine taking off. The air pressure dropped instantly. The heavy steel door they had entered through slammed shut and magnetically locked to seal the room. The sudden change in pressure knocked the cleaner off balance. The detonator skittered across the floor, sliding under the raised floor tiles. Arthur didn't hesitate. He wasn't a soldier, but he was a man fighting for his life. He lowered his shoulder and tackled the cleaner into the metal racking. The two men crashed to the floor, trading blows amidst the swirling white powder and the deafening roar of the gas discharge. Sarah scrambled on her hands and knees, coughing, her lungs burning as the oxygen levels plummeted. She wasn't looking for the detonator. She was looking for Garrison. She found him. She grabbed a shard of metal from the destroyed server casing and sawed frantically at the zip ties on his wrists. "Come on," she grunted, the metal slicing her own palm. "Come on." The tie snapped. Garrison ripped the gag from his mouth, gasping for air. He was weak, battered, but his eyes were full of fury. He didn't say a word. He lunged into the fray. Arthur was losing. The cleaner had him pinned, hands around Arthur's throat, squeezing the life out of him. Garrison hit the cleaner like a freight train. He didn't use technique. He used pure, unadulterated rage. He grabbed the assassin by the back of his tactical vest and hurled him headfirst into the steel doorframe. The cleaner crumpled, unconscious. "The override!" Garrison wheezed, pointing to a keypad by the door. "We need air! The halon will suffocate us in 2 minutes!" Arthur, coughing and clutching his throat, stumbled to the keypad. "He changed! The codes!" "Use the master override," Garrison yelled. "Alpha 09. Arthur punched the keys. Access denied. "He hacked it!" Arthur cried. Sarah looked at the unconscious assassin. She looked at his wrist. The smartwatch. The same one Chloe had worn. It was glowing in the dim light. She crawled over to the body. She grabbed his limp hand and held the watch up. "It's biometric," she realized. She pressed the assassin's thumb against the screen. The watch beeped. A menu appeared. System control, ventilation, lockdown. Sarah tapped, disable lockdown. The magnetic seals on the door hissed and released. Fresh, humid tropical air rushed into the room, displacing the suffocating halon gas. Sarah collapsed back against the cold server rack, taking deep, greedy gulps of air. Arthur slid down the wall next to her. Garrison kicked the assassin's gun away and zip-tied the man's hands with his own restraints. It was over. The sprawling glass office in downtown Chicago overlooked the lake. It was a far cry from the greasy counter of the midnight griddle. The nameplate on the door read, Sarah Bennett, VP of Operations. Sarah sat behind the desk, reviewing the quarterly reports. She wore a tailored cream suit that cost more than her old apartment building. She looked different, harder, perhaps, but happier. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," she said. Arthur Sterling walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Black for me, hazelnut with 2 sugars for you. I made it myself. No poisons, I promise." Sarah smiled, taking the cup. "Thanks, Arthur. Did you hear back from the lawyers?" "I did," Arthur said, sitting in the chair opposite her. Derek Cole's plea deal was rejected. The evidence we recovered from the cleaner's phone linked him to 3 other corporate assassinations. Derek is going away for life. No parole. And the cleaner? Supermax, Arthur said. He's singing like a bird to cut his sentence. He gave up the whole network. Sarah took a sip of the coffee. It was perfect. "How is Aunt Linda?" Arthur asked. "She loves the facility." Sarah beamed. "She's actually dating a retired admiral there. She told me yesterday she's too busy for my visits." Arthur laughed, a genuine hearty sound that filled the room. "Well, that leaves you with some free time, which is good, because we have a meeting in Tokyo on Monday. The board wants to discuss the Asian expansion." Sarah stood up and walked to the window. She looked down at the city streets below. Somewhere down there, in the rain and the grit, people were struggling. They were working double shifts, hiding from landlords, praying for a miracle. She had been one of them. All it took was one moment of courage, one note on a napkin, to change everything. She turned back to Arthur. "I'm ready," she said. Arthur smiled. "I know you are. You were ready the moment you cleared that table." Sarah Bennett wasn't just a waitress who got lucky. She was a woman who saw the truth when everyone else looked away. And in a world full of lies, that was the most valuable currency of all. And that is the incredible story of Sarah Bennett. She went from counting dimes for rent to running an empire, all because she refused to let a good man be destroyed by a bad friend. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many times in our lives do we see something wrong but choose to look away because we're afraid of the consequences? Sarah proved that sometimes the biggest risk isn't speaking up, it's staying silent. What would you have done if you were in Sarah's shoes at that diner? Would you have written the note, or would you have just poured the coffee and walked away? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, justice, and redemption, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes open. You never know when your life is about to change.